What's up, guys? Casino Crime here, and this is part two of my series titled How to Beat 25 PLO. I started this series because it seems like a lot of players in the forums and just members of Deuces Cracked overall are kind of micro slash low stakes guys looking to crush the stakes they're playing and move up and play bigger stakes, of course. So what I did was I recorded about 2 hours of footage from a Bovada live session. I think this was played maybe a month ago. And, you know, I gotta admit, I didn't play very well during this live session. My goal was sort of to play as many pots as possible. Look, like, I think part of the reason you guys watch these videos is for entertainment. It's also learning purposes. But I don't think, well, I don't think that it would be as educational, well, I should say as much fun to watch me just sort of knit around and like grind out a session at 25 PLO. Not to mention these aren't the stakes that I normally play, so that's not very realistic. And second of all, I think it's kind of fun to see um, how it looks when we're playing a lot of hands and like seeing all of the different marginal situations that you get yourself into. I want to start off and tell a couple of interesting stories actually. Several years ago, I had someone reach out to me for coaching, and I ran him kind of through the gauntlet of questions, yada yada yada. And this person was playing like pretty low stakes. I think it was like maybe it was 25 cent, 50 cent at the time or whatever. And uh, you know, I told him I was like, all right, well, record a video for me, and then I can get a better idea of your leaks, and we can go from there. And this person recorded a video of themselves playing, and it turned out that they were like a really weak player, and I mean really weak. Like their preflop stats were like it was like a 65 like 8, okay, and you would think that. Well, first of all, let me say that I only did one session with this player because I said, look, you have a lot of like really big leaks that, frankly, I don't think it's a good investment of your money to like pay kind of a lot for coaching when you really need to start from the bottom, like with the basics, right? Second of all, it was extremely educational for me because it's rare that you get to sort of be in the cockpit looking at someone who's playing that many hands, right? Because most of us, especially people who are in the training community who are looking to improve their game, they're not going to play like that badly. Okay, so it was really interesting for me to see how tough it was for this player to like other players are just kind of attacking him. He's flopping a lot of like kind of weak stuff all the time, if he ever flopped anything at all. You kind of saw why it's so negative EV and tough to play when you're playing terribly, right? So sometimes it's kind of fun playing lower and trying to play as many pots as possible because you get an idea of what it's like to not have anything more often. I don't know if that makes sense, but when we're playing the other players, a lot of times I say like you want to attack the players who have wide ranges or in spots where they have wide ranges. Well, it's kind of fun when you're actually the player who's assuming that position, if that makes sense. So picking up where we left off last time, um, and I'll try to not, you know, um, I'll try to not like beat to death concepts that we talked about last time. We could see, like, for example, on table 3, I just posted out of position. I would never do that in a real game, but I want to see as many hands as possible. Um, this hand, King, Queen, 6 deuce double suited in the top right table. I mean, it's okay to complete. This is, I think most players define this as like a trouble hand, but getting such a great price pre-flop, you know, it's pretty easy to complete. That's the type of hand that I would fold under the gun, in middle position with the right like players behind me, like aggressive guys. I would fold that as well. But certainly getting that great price, we can complete. And let's try to fast forward to get into a couple more spots. I'm sure that I just like give up on this table 3. And I talked about this a lot in my last video, but I'll put in some light stabs in 3-way pots, but typically in 4-way pots, I play very straightforward, both live and online. And I think it's a good approach. And in general, the more players there are in the pot, the less poker is being played. And when I mean the less poker is being played, the more what I mean is like in terms of like uh like maneuvering and floating and stuff like that. There's pretty little of that. I wouldn't have hated like I mean it wouldn't be a great open with king queen nine deuce single suited, but hey, like for entertainment value, I think we could have like opened that and it would have been fun to play. So again, like I've harped on this in other videos, but this is the best c betting spot. Basically, I mean it's in no limit as well, but certainly in PLO when it's a three-way pot, a three-way single raised pot, and we have the pre-flop initiative, and we're second to act. Like this is where your c betting range should pretty much be the highest. Just on almost all boards. I mean, it's different if you have absolute nothing and the flop is like 7, 8, 9 two-tone. If you have nothing, then yeah, it's fine to just give up. But in general, especially on drier boards and on paired boards like this, you should be c-betting almost 100%. I would imagine that I decided to do so. If I didn't, shame on me, because you should pretty much. I would always c-bet here. Come on, John, you could do it. We're thinking about it. Yeah, of course we're c-betting. Okay, good. And the thing that's nice also is you don't have to bet very big, right? Like we're giving ourselves a good price. We're only bet 60% of the pot. It's good to be like, and it's a good amount. Like, sometimes some players recommend betting like third pot here. I mean, I prefer something like 60% in a multi-way pot. It just looks more believable. Like that's how much I would bet if I had a king or with my entire like value betting range. That's what I would pick. Like third pot, I might bet if it was a heads up pot, just because I usually bet smaller in heads up pots. I should say. So, you don't want to bet too small to where people are just peeling you with anything, and then you're kind of unsure whether you're gonna barrel or not. So, if you're potting it there, that's not good. If you're betting like third pot, I don't think that's good either. So something like 50 or 60% pot there is going to be optimal for you. I would imagine I play this Queen Jack 4-5 double suited. Yeah, there we go. And I mean, like, if let's say this was a full ring game, and there were several limpers, and I was on the button, I would probably limp behind. But again, like somebody who limps under the gun at like your standard 25-cent, 50-cent pot limit Omaha game on Bovada is going to be weak. So where you print money at these stakes is just like raising and c-betting, and kind of taking the obvious spots. If I was to recommend like an optimal pre-flop, VPIP PFR, it would be like 25-20 or like 27-22. You just really can't go wrong with like at the low stakes playing like a tag style. These guys are just like their big mistakes are playing too wide pre and too wide on the flop, and you can just kind of get away with a lot. So we flop an open ender and a poor flush round. I'm curious to see actually what we did, because I'm not sure. I mean, like I could see I could actually see like with these stacks in a single raise pot, like I don't really mind checking back. If we had the nut flush draw, of course I would bet. But we have like a nut open ender, but not a nut flush draw. Like, if we get check raised, of course we're doing okay against the set, but we can certainly have our flush draw dominated. So I really wouldn't mind like checking it back and playing the hand for two streets, as opposed to like betting and calling it off, for example. I want to see what happened on table 4 here because I missed the action. Okay, so under the gun raised to 3x, and this is an interesting spot actually. This is a hand where it would be nice to have a HUD, right? I would love to know how tight or loose this player is playing. If someone was playing a tight range, like if it nit opened under the gun, then I would just fold this typically. And be fine with it. I mean, it doesn't play very well against an under the gun range, and we're out of position, so I would just dump it. I'm, calling is okay because hey, we're playing 10 to 25 cent. We're trying to see some flops, and that's okay. But if we like, realistically, I don't know. The tightest spot that I play at the table is from the small blind, and most players, big league is just playing too many hands from the small blind. It's difficult to make money from the small blind, frankly. You know, it's one of those. It's mainly because you play. When you hit something, it's difficult to get maximum value, and when you miss, it can be difficult to bluff, and you kind of just get yourself in tricky spots from the small blind. So, where you should be playing the tightest at the table is typically from the small blind, no matter what stakes you're playing. I decided to call, but if I was closing the action from the big blind, I would call and just try to overnut this player or win on low boards and stuff like that, because most players, of course, are going to have big cards from opening from this position. But again, it's difficult without reads. Certainly, you can take a lot of different lines if you have better reads on players. It looks like I'm getting ready to lead on table 4. Nope, I decided to check. I mean, I don't hate leading, actually. I think it's fine. My thing is if I led, I probably would just think that the under the gun player was going to check back, and I wanted to get him to call and fold or set myself up for barrels. And I didn't have any reads on this player, so I guess I just decided to check call. Again, I wouldn't really hate check raising, but I think my belief at the time was that he wouldn't just lead with kind of a random bluff. I'm getting such a good price. It doesn't look like I want to fold, so yeah. So this is sort of the problem with. So let's go back to the Queen Jack 4-5 hand. Make sure I get the action right. So it looks like this player donks on the 9-10 deuce, and we just call, which I think is pretty standard. And we get check raised from the small blind. I decided to fold. I mean, I really don't looking back. I don't like the fold at all. He raised less than pot. We're getting a good price, so I'm not sure really why I folded. But regardless, I think it's a poor fold. But I think I was just concerned with my flush draw being dominated, so I'm not sure why I folded. Kind of a lapse in judgment, I suppose. But I mean, he check raised less than pot. We do have nuts straight outs, and a lot of players when they check raise in that spot are more likely to have a made hand than a flush draw. So it's probably fine to. I mean, you're just sort of sadly sticking it in, I guess, or calling it, at least seeing a turn, and folding if the board pairs. So, okay. Topping off on the other tables. Okay, so let's see. Make sure I get the action right on this table on the bottom right here. Okay, so we open from the cutoff with 9-5 3 deuce double suited. It's not a great open, but again, I wanted to play some pots, play as many as I could. And in a shorthanded game, I guess it's fine to open I don't know, as a general rule of thumb in most games, I open any double suited hand from the cutoff just as a default. Night, it's being in position with what are called smooth hands is typically it's a good approach. So that's why I open this. And then we get a 3-bet from the out of position player, and we call, and everything is pretty standard so far, of course. I would call really at any stack depth with this hand. And post flop we get it in. We lose. So we're talking about or I guess we've talked before about taking player notes on players, and the importance of that when it's anonymous tables, right? Although you won't run into that same player again, or you don't know if you will. It's still important to know how players are playing at the table, at least for this session. And this would certainly be something to note, is that this guy 3-bet out of position with ace 8-8-6 with a nut suit. So it would just encourage me to want to 4-bet this player a lot more if somebody's 3-betting like these kind of trashy, like, not trashy, but, middling paired hands that typically are played better as a call. It would make me want to 4-bet this player a lot lighter. Like, kings is certainly the nuts to 4-bet this player pre with. So that would be something that would be very important to note. So I want to make sure I get this action right on table 2. So I would imagine that I opened pre, c-bet the flop, and now I'm barreling. And this is going to be a good one to talk about, so that's good. Oh, yep, okay, so looks like I ISO'd a limper, which is good. King, queen, 7-4 with a suit on the button. It's fine. The guy limp folds. Again, like we're talking about player notes. That's a pretty easy one to note. Somebody limp folds from the cutoff. I mean, you should just be pounding cutoff limps if he's going to be limp folding. There. The flop comes Jack 8 deuce rainbow. Again, like this is how you're going to print money at the low stakes, is c-betting these boards using good bet sizing. I mean, you don't even have to go this big. I mean, 185 or something like that would be fine here. But this is certainly like a must bet. So, something that's actually interesting to note, though, is most players, even like weaker players, will have stronger ranges for just calling from the small blind than they will from the big blind. So, like, I'm not saying to check this back by any means, only because, like, there's a lot of good barreling opportunities. But, realize that players, I don't know, at all levels are going to have stronger ranges for calling from the small blind than they are from the big blind. Like, more big card heavy, more like, kings, weak aces, reasonable rundowns and stuff like that. So like because this player called pre from the small blind, I would imagine getting peeled here a lot more than I would if like somebody called from the big blind, for example. And, if this was hold'em, this would be like a decent turn to just like check back and try to get the showdown. But my plan here is actually, I would imagine, would be to like bet and turn this into a bluff. I think that, again, like, most of these players are just too wide pre and then too wide post. They love to like peel the flop and see like how the hand develops, like if they make any hands. So I think it's better to bet and barrel and just kind of turn this into a bluff than it is to like check back and try to get the showdown, which I would imagine that I do. 9-10 is like we can certainly have 9-10. We can have the queen is like having the queen is more of like a blocker to like two pairs that can call me down than it is like a showdown hand, if that makes sense in this situation. So I'm interested to see what happens. Kind of hope that like it bricks and we follow through, and it's more fun to play like that anyway. And the thing is like if let's say the river is a 4 or something, we can check it back. So this is sort of just like it's like a light semi bluff and allowing me to position myself to like represent like bluff sometimes on the river, check it back on some other rivers, but more than anything it keeps like the nuts in my range. It's like a yeah, that's basically what it is. So he folds, which is good. Again, like I see some players checking back there, and I'm gonna go back real quick. I just don't think our hand is strong enough to check back. I mean, if you had a hand like, I'm trying to think of it, like maybe maybe like, well, I don't know. I can't imagine really any hand. I would just be betting a lot of my range there. Like even 2 pairs, I would be betting for protection. Even if I had like queen 8 or queen jack, I think aces I would still bet. Sometimes like you can check back aces because, like these guys are so passive that they won't bluff you on the river. But regardless, like I like betting the turn because it prevents us from getting bluffed on the river against most players at these levels. If it was like a higher stakes game and I was playing someone who like could like lead and bluff me on the river and stuff like that, like I might check back the turn there with aces. But I don't know. I think against players who are more straightforward, I just kind of prefer betting. Uh, Looks like a limped pot on table 3. Just going to give up unless we improve to something great. I would imagine I lead on table 1. I mean, I said earlier that, I like to play straightforward in 4-way pots, but I don't know. Our hand, it's unlikely that people have sets, and our hand has equity against calling ranges, and there's going to be some good runouts for me to bet, just like bet and barrel. So here I'm just sort of betting for like pseudo value and for like some bluff equity on some runouts. Of course, it's like the nutted turn. Now my concern is like keeping it worse and just making sure that like I get value from overpairs and other like straight draws and stuff. Certainly want to keep in like 5-6 type hands because of course like the 3 fills this up. So, want to keep in like random straight draw type hands. But he folds. And like honestly, I mean, if we're talking about turns that I would continue barreling, I can't really think of any turn that I would really slow down on. And there's a lot of turns that I would like be potting. Like let's say the turn was like, I mean, the worst turn for us would be like a 6. Maybe I would just like check and give up on that kind of turn. But even then, I think I could still bet. I mean, a lot of players will just like peel here with a overpair and like a gutter, and you might be surprised how many folds you get. So I would likely, my plan to when I donk that flop is to pretty much continue barreling with almost all of my range. Grinding away, looking for some hands to play. Okay, so here we go. Looks like we opened pre from the button with 3-10-7-4 with a kind of bad suit. Flop a straight, and I want to make sure that I get the action right. I think he donked the flop. Oh no, we isolated a limper. Let's see. Looks like we just limped behind, which, I mean, I don't know. We talked a little bit. Sometimes, if I think that everybody's just going to call me, like, let's say it's a live game, right? This will happen a lot, where, especially in like button straddled live games, where the players are very bad, but they're just like really passive and loose pre and just not in the mood to fold. I'll limp behind with a lot of like, in a lot of situations with, I don't want to say trash, but anything that's even like playable, just because you're getting a great price on the limp and people play straightforward pre-flop, or I'm sorry, post-flop, and they have some pretty glaring physical reads. So I can kind of get an idea of when they're going to like checking and giving up. So I'll win sometimes with even like using good sizing. But I don't, and in those kind of situations, I don't like raising pre because, especially if I have a junky hand like this, because if everyone's just calling me, well, and I'm not going to be flopping something very often, then you're just building up a pot for someone else to win, because I'm not going to win just based off of my cards very often. So, I'm limping behind basically with, based on the assumption that I can just win it without having any cards. And I guess that's what I did here. So it's okay. I mean, this is clearly like a poor hand, but, being in position, having people fold sometimes, I'm sure it's not like the worst against these players. If I remember correctly, though, this guy ends up having a straight, the nut straight, so I end up losing. And I think that like I really wanted to fold the river when he bets. I think I thought that he could have like some sets, and I had played my hand slowly. And you can kind of see, like from my experience, frankly, when players put in 3 streets of betting at these levels, they almost always are nutted. It's so rarely a bluff. So, and as a general rule of thumb, at like the lower micro stakes, people just are straightforward on the river. So, I I don't know, if you see somebody like putting in big bets on the river, it's much more heavily weighted towards value betting or nutted hands um, than it is plus. So here we raise from the button with King Jack 9-5, all diamonds. And you can see my sizing is usually 3x, which I think is like a default is pretty good. You know, at the higher limits, I'll make it like 2.5x just because people are more 3-betty. But at these limits, it's better to go bigger, I think, from the button because players are much more passive and just call more often. So you can, I don't know, and we're just going to be c-betting a lot, and people are going to be check folding a lot, so you win more dead money that way. So I would say, like, you know, like if you're playing below PLO 100, you should go 3x on the button. If you're playing like you know, PLO 100 and above, then, you know, 2.5x on the button is good. But really at any level, how you decide which sizing to open with is dependent on how 3-betty your opponents are. Certainly if you have a good hand and you want to be able to 4-bet bigger, then make it bigger on the button. Like if you have a maniac in the blinds, for example, and you'll come across those players that are 3-betting seriously like 50% or something. Here we open with a pretty good hand in the cutoff. 9, 10, 10, 7. I would imagine my plan here is to just like barrel. And I chose a bigger sizing because, you know, because I want to get more fold equity, and B, because I plan on following through. It's not like the best river for us because he could definitely have sets, and you're sort of like, when you're setting up this barrel, you're kind of banking on the fact that he has like a set or a 2-pair, and he's just going to like check call, and see if he fills up and then check fold. And, you know, I kind of expect to get called here now a decent amount of the time. But then again, like I have tens blockers. People do have 2 pairs here sometimes. And I like betting because, I don't know, I think that in general, like especially at the lower stakes, the two things I don't really beat myself or my students up for is triple barreling too much or value owning themselves. You know, because I feel like that's where most of the profit comes from at the micro and low stakes, is just kind of value betting thinly and, you know, c-betting and double barreling and triple barreling. So, you know, if I got called here, I just would chalk it up to, you know, I tried to use some aggression and got looked up. And hopefully it works. Success! So yeah, that's kind of my reasoning there. Let's see what happens here in this table. Looks like it was a limped pot. Want to make sure that we get it right. Oh, okay, so it's 25-50. All right. Okay, there's an under the gun limper, so he's probably likely a weak player. We flop kind of a weird one. It's like we have the deuce is a straight out. I guess it is like an open ender, and a poor flush draw. Again, like I think leading here would be bad. I'd prefer more just like check calling and playing a small pot rather than a big pot. Maybe a new player would think that our hand was pretty strong, but it's really not that great. With the poor flush draw and like, you know, with the only nut out we really have is a non-spade 7. So, you know, I don't think that there's really any reason for betting. Hopefully I don't bet. Looks like I timed out instead. So that's okay. We raised the button on table 4 with king 10 10 5. Pretty standard. We open from the cutoff with ace jack 10 3 with a nut suit and call through it from the small blind. Again, like I actually really don't like this call of the 3-bet. I think it's poor. But it brings up actually an important point. One is that a common mistake that I see players make. This is actually probably one of the biggest leak that I see small stakes players have, and just all players in general, is calling a squeeze in this situation with a hand that plays poorly against aces. All right. So one thing that's important to note is recognizing the difference between like a normal 3-bet, and a squeeze, right? A lot of times when players post a hand on the forums, they say the stats of someone, and they'll say, this guy's playing like a 33-24, and he's 3-betting 13%. Okay, but I will say that pretty much if you see someone squeeze, it's almost always, it's like their range is so much stronger in aces and just really strong hands in general. Especially at the low stakes when 3-betting ranges are already pretty low. People, if they're willing to squeeze, have an even stronger hand. Secondly, what I want to point out is this hand plays poorly against aces, okay? And not to mention that we have this player behind us. So, like, think about it. When we flop something good or something, most of the time we'll be like jamming over a c-bet and kind of announcing that our hand is strong and allowing the button to play perfectly. By like making a tight fold or, it's just going to be like when we actually make a hand, we're not going to be able to play it very effectively. And when we miss, we're going to have to fold. It's like it won't be a spot that we'll bluff often because, well, we already know the small blind's range is strong, so we don't want to put in a bluff against someone who already has a strong range. And second of all, we have to worry about the player behind us. So, and in general, like if you're thinking about the profitability of any pre-flop call or getting involved pre-flop, if you have like the potential for bluffing when you miss, and like getting paid sometimes when you get there, then you typically have a profitable pre-flop call. And I'm talking like if it's a single raise pot, 3-bet pot, 4-bet pot. But if you are never gonna, if you're like very rarely going to bluff, and you're only gonna get paid when you get there sometimes, then it's likely a poor pre-flop call. And in general, like almost all pre-flop calls, in order for them to be profitable, you need to be able to either get thin value or bluff sometimes. So, and here it's like we don't really have those two options. So I don't like the call pre. I probably normally wouldn't call if I wasn't making a video, but that's okay. It's good to bring that up. And now, like, you can kind of see like the situation that we're in is, man, this guy's like got a super strong pre-flop range, and there's like a really dry board. And he's like pretty polarized, but we're just sort of in a tough spot, and we end up folding to the re-raise. So, good lesson to learn though. We flop a set on King 10, 10, 5. I think we timed out, which is unfortunate. Yep, looks like it, but that's okay. Really not very used to the software, but it's not a big deal. So let's see what happened. Looks like we somehow played a big pot on table 1. Okay. So let's see what happens. Like I said, I would imagine we checked, called the bet from the button, and he potted it. Like, I really wouldn't hate folding here. I guess I talked myself into calling because of all this, that like he could have sets and stuff like that. Really don't like the way that if we ended up getting it down the turn, I don't really like the way that we played it. I would have, especially because he's potting it. Again, like I've said in other videos, beware of people who are just like potting it. Typically, like my rule of thumb is when they pot it, they got it. But here, I guess I ignored my own advice and just decided to stick it in. And he, of course, has the nuts, so that's unfortunate. I don't like my play at all. I would imagine, like, I would prefer to just like call one more time on the river and then check fold if he pots it. Or just, not doing what I did would be the best play. Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, there's some situations where I would raise this ace jack 9-4 double suited. If like the button limped, I would raise it. If the cutoff limped and the button folded, I would raise it. If early position limped, I would probably raise. I mean, of course, like assuming we have 100 big blinds and not the like 6 big blinds we have here, 8 because we don't have auto top up enabled. I think I didn't see that auto top up is not enabled. Obviously, I would have just like stuck it in. So. Okay. So, some poor play on a couple of the tables, but that's okay. Like, it's a good learning experience for you guys anyway. Sometimes I win here, which is nice, which would be hilarious. But if I remember right, he has quads. Yep. Open 10-9, 6 deuce with a suit. Player calls. Again, like where we print money is just by like opening and c-betting, and you know we have a gutter against at least some of his range, so I think it's a pretty good spot to like bet and barrel sometimes, especially with the backdoor flush draw. So I'm curious to see if I just like shut down. Up on table 2, I believe we 3-bet, but let's double check. We just called, and I would imagine my thinking at the time was that he potted it pre, and he has a short stack, so that makes his range a little bit stronger. If he min opened, I would have 3-bet. That's how seriously I take people's pre-flop sizing. I think it makes a big difference at these levels. So. Okay. And I just bet small for value on the river. I mean, there could be, it might be better to check, but I just felt like I always had the best hand, so I decided to just bet small for value and hope that worse called me. Okay. And again, like kind of similar to I triple barreled and followed through on this ace king jack rainbow hand. And I thought it was like a pretty good run out for me to bluff actually. Sometimes you run into a backdoor flush, especially because I don't have any blockers. But you know, I have the 10 blocker, and you know, I just think that people are like calling it on these boards. These boards are a lot different than like a 9-4-6 board or something like that, where people will have, you know, people are more willing to like call you down. But here, I just think like you always, people are like really, since he didn't, you know, they always raise with their straights on earlier streets. You can certainly represent a straight, but they all, you know, everybody's got the like big cards in their range. There's a lot of like 2-pair type hands and sets that will like call 2 streets and then fold to a river bet. Here I called an open with Jack, Jack, 10-9 with a suit. I think it's pretty standard. I would imagine I just fold this turn. I mean, we do have an open ender and like jacks, but well, I guess we called. Check, check, and he wins with queen 6. I guess like I called the turn because he bet smaller, but I think that you're going to be beat a lot of the time. So unless you're getting the right price, or you think you can win on some rivers without actually getting there, then it's probably a poor call. And I'm going to stop it there today like I normally do. It's about 20 minutes of video time, and we covered a lot of good topics, so I think it's a good stopping point. And I'd like to stretch this one out to, 4 videos, and it looks like we're about halfway through, so that's good, or a little bit less than halfway through. As always, please let me know if you have any questions or feedback in the forums, and I'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and write me an email if you'd like to, have any video requests in the future, or like I said, write it in the forums. It's John Beaupre, aka Casino Crime, signing off for today. Good luck, guys.